Hey guys, welcome to the Real Talk podcast of KIS. This is the post full scale invasion reboot of Kiev International School's podcast about students, teachers, and pretty much anything else going on at the school. This week's episode is an interview between me, a teacher at KIS, and Marcel, a student who will be graduating this year after spending his entire schooling at KIS. We talk about his unique background, his upbringing, the war, and what's next. As usual, all the views expressed in this video are our own. Kick back and enjoy the episode. All right. Just go ahead and start speaking.
Okay, hello.
All right, I think it's probably good enough.
Okay.
All right. So I guess this is the first interview after the start of the war, right?
Yes.
So we're like re-energizing, restarting. What was it called? God, what did Miss Lena say it was called? Real Talk?
Yeah, real talk.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you're gonna be the first interviewee, and I've got a couple of questions for you to start out. So we have like a little lightning round right here. And these are just like really quick questions that I'm going to ask you just to kind of get to know you.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite food?
My favorite food.
Okay, what's your favorite Ukrainian food? Let's start with that.
Okay, Ukrainian food.
Yeah.
Probably be borscht. I love borscht.
Okay, that's pretty typical.
Yeah, it's pretty typical, but
Yeah.
honestly, nothing better than a good like bowl of just borscht, good mom's borscht.
Does your mom make pretty good borscht?
Yeah, she does for sure.
Okay. What about non-Ukrainian food?
Non-Ukrainian?
Don't say like McDonald's or something.
No,
It's
no,
like,
no, I don't.
that'd be like a travesty.
No.
Yeah.
I really like Lebanese style shawarma. It's pretty different than
Mhm.
the ones that they sell like just on the kiosks in Kiev or in
Yeah.
other cities. But
Those are like food poisoning.
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, those are like dangerous for the health.
For
But
sure, yeah.
I really like shawarma, like
Mhm.
Lebanese style shawarma for sure.
Yeah, I lived off that when I was in Lebanon because like they
Mhm.
were so cheap. They were like the
Yeah.
only thing that was cheap in
Yeah,
Lebanon.
yeah, yeah.
That's like all I ate for like 3 months.
Those just like really good.
Yeah. I mean, it was like it got the job done for sure.
Yeah.
Next favorite vacation spot.
Favorite vacation spot. Wow. I think it probably just so happens that every time we go somewhere on vacation with my family, we'll end up going somewhere different.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been returning to Greece for the third year now.
Okay.
So I think probably Greece, because any other country that we visit, we are there for like a couple of weeks and we don't really go back there much.
Anywhere specific in Greece? Like an
Anywhere
island or-
specific? I mean, honestly, the favorite thing we've done in Greece is we got like a small yacht
Mhm.
for a week with
Yeah.
one of our family friends who like rented it out to us,
Mhm.
and we did like a tournée all over the Greek islands, and that was probably one of my favorite experiences. It's way less romantic than it sounds like. Like you have to do a lot of
Do you guys
work.
sail it yourself, or do you guys have like a captain that you hire?
No, we have to like our friend was
Okay.
that captain, so.
I was gonna say because like that could go really if you're just like, oh, I'm gonna rent a boat and
Oh no, they won't
Yeah.
let you. No,
Yeah, it's
just,
fair enough.
just rent it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next, favorite subject.
Favorite subject. My favorite subject probably have to be like film class because I
Fair enough.
really enjoy film class. But my second favorite definitely business management. I
Cool.
think.
And last full movie you watched.
Last full movie I watched, like movie series.
It could be either one, I guess.
Either
Like,
one.
I'm not
Um,
particular.
I think the last thing I finished was Better Call Saul.
Okay, that's pretty legit. I approve of
Yeah.
that choice. Thought
Beca-
like
Yeah, I started watching it, and I think I stopped in like the second or third season,
mhm.
and I forgot basically most of the plot. So over the summer, I started watching again, and I think I finished it like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that show's definitely a journey.
Yes, for sure. Like really good show.
Do any of the characters in particular like resonate with you, or was there one that resonated with you more than any of the others?
Resonate with me.
Like one that you relate to.
I'm not sure if there's like a character that I necessarily relate to, but I really like respect Mike.
Yeah.
Ehrmantraut. Like
I was gonna say the same thing actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that I relate to him, but I think the way and the manner in which he handles deep crazy situations that come his way as being a
Mhm.
part of the like literally working with the
With Gus, right?
with Gus and the cartel. Like that guy has some like real courage and like just the ability to really cold-mindedly handle issues, and I think it's very valuable.
To be honest, I always kind of, well, not always, but I kind of feel like Mike has a very Ukrainian mentality. Just kind of like dust it off, just like very like kind of, honestly, like kind of gruff, like doesn't really care what goes on. Is
Yeah,
just able to like weather the storm.
Yeah, now that you say that, I think I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about you, Marcel, did I even mention your name? I don't
No
know if
problem.
I.
I
All
don't
right.
know. Maybe.
Oh, it'll be in the intro. It's no big deal.
Okay.
So where were you born?
I was born in Kiev. I was born in Kiev, Ukraine. So,
Okay, so where are your parents from? Are they from Kiev? From Kiev?
my mom is from um like this small region called Dubrovice
Mm-hmm.
in Ukraine,
Okay. What part of
and
Ukraine is it in?
it's like closer to Belarus.
Okay. All right.
So, and my dad is from Lebanon, from Beirut. So,
Okay. So that's actually like an interesting part of the story. So like, how did your dad end up in Ukraine? Well, first of all, when did your dad come here?
I think he came here. He was 18,
Yeah.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, like right as he was finishing school and starting to go to university. And I think at that time, the the Communist Party in Lebanon had some sort of like exchange program, or they were just like offering like young Lebanese guys and girls the opportunity to go to Ukraine to study, and a lot of them chose that because in Lebanon at that time you couldn't really do much overall. Like there was a lot of problems, wars, and just it was very difficult. So my dad came here, studied in university. Then he ended up. Now I'm kind of dusty on that part of the story. I think he came to Kiev, and him, and my mother, his wife, were working in the same clinic, so doing their internship.
Does he ever talk about what it was like to adapt to life in Ukraine?
Um, I don't know if he like. I think his adaptation came pretty quickly because I think overall at a young age, and I think being 18, like that's pretty young, you come to a new place and you kind of adapt pretty quickly. Like my dad has really good Ukrainian, like compared to the other Lebanese guys that I know here. Like his Ukrainian is really, really good, and he likes Ukrainian food. He kind of supports our family's Ukrainian traditions, and I don't think he has any currently for sure any troubles like adapting or being a part of this like Ukrainian community that we're in. But at the beginning, I think he definitely had his challenges without like the difference between Lebanese food and Ukrainian food, and Lebanese culture and Ukrainian culture, like very different.
So also like I don't know if your dad's ever spoken about this, but like I know that the Lebanese Civil War was going on probably about the time that he came here. I imagine if it hadn't been going on, it was about to start up. Does he ever like mention any parallels between that experience and what's going on in Ukraine right now?
Well, there's a funny story that my dad told me, I think like a year back actually, that when the Civil War started, that he didn't tell his mom, but he got onto just like a random truck and they gave him like I think like an AK-47, and he just went to fight.
Just went to war.
Yeah,
Like
and then his mom found out.
so,
And
so where were you after school
yeah,
today?
yeah. And like he quickly returned home. But overall, I think my dad, like, he, when the whole thing started, he was like very cool, calm, and collected. You know, my mom was kind of like freaking out. Everybody, I mean, he was definitely freaking out, but I guess there's kind of like this like mental thing that he has, and it's still there from that experience from Lebanon, and he just kind of like accepted the fact, and he quickly started moving forward with like what to do and like how to fix the situation. So
Yeah, I think that once you've had sort of a formative event like that where everything just is like unstable, you don't know what's going to happen next.
yeah,
Probably the next time it happens, you're like, ah, okay, I've been here before. Like I know how to deal with this.
yeah, I
All
think
right.
so too.
Yeah. Okay, so you're born. Did you start school at KIS? Like, have you been here literally your entire
Yes,
schooling?
I've never ever been to any other school other than my music school, which
Okay.
was a Ukrainian school. But
So like, I mean, how did you end up coming to KIS? Was it did your parents wanted you to like eventually go study abroad, or like what was the deal with you coming here?
so I have an older brother.
Hmm.
He's currently 24, so he's 7 years older than me. And by the time I came here, my brother was like, I think in the middle of like middle school, or like finishing middle school or something. Actually, not. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, but my parents wanted to move back to Lebanon, and they were looking for a school that would be either French or English, so that my brother could have like an easier transition coming to Lebanon. But something happened. They decided to stay here, and so my brother just kept going to the school. And eventually, when I was born, after like 3 to 4 years, my parents also decided to take me to the school, and I think I started like kindergarten here. So I spent 1 year in kindergarten, then I moved on to first grade.
So were there other points in your life where like your parents were debating going back to Lebanon? Or was that like the only point and then you guys were just like, all right,
Definitely not that I remember of for sure,
okay.
because um, my parents had their thing going here. Like they had their at that point they didn't start their business yet, but they were working. Everything was fine. Like their children are going to one of the best schools here, so like I think they didn't really have a reason
Yeah,
to
why rock
leave.
the boat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So did you already speak English to some extent when you started school here? Or was that
No, I didn't know English at all. I I spoke slight Ukrainian.
hmm
I mean, as a kid.
So like what did you I mean, what did you speak at home at that
I
point?
speak exclusively Ukrainian at home and Arabic too.
Okay, so you speak Arabic on like a daily basis. Or
I wouldn't say like it's more of it's less of like speaking Arabic with more of like throwing phrases around
yeah,
here
yeah.
and there.
Okay.
But for sure, yeah, I think I speak some form of Arabic like every day.
Okay, and you also speak French as well, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Did you pick that up at school or was that just something that
Yeah, in school, because when it came time when I finished my intensive English courses, which was kind of like I don't remember like 2 year course on I think by the time I was 7. So I learned English by the time I was 7.
So wait, you had intensive English when you were 7? Do they? Oh, I guess do they do that at the school anymore, or is that?
I don't think they do that anymore. But
Yeah, but at
like
that point,
like when you came to this school
hmm
and you would not have any basic knowledge in English, you would, instead of going to your English class, or at that point like you would not be with your 5-year-old class or your 6-year-old class, and you would be going to a separate teacher who would be teaching you English. So and then you'd come back to the class for like math or stuff like that. And whenever you were done with your intensive English course, you got put back to your class for English and all other subjects. And at that point, after you're done with your intensive English course, you're able to take and choose like a language that you want to study. So I think I chose French. So obviously my parents were kind of pushing me because, you know, Marcel, like everybody speaks French in Lebanon, like blah, blah, blah. Like,
yeah, it made sense as like a second language,
yeah,
or I
yeah, for
guess
sure.
like a third, fourth
Yeah,
language at that
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Okay. Like, so when you came to school, were like some of your earliest friends Ukrainian speakers, or was it like, did you have like an international group of friends?
I think like at the time that I was 5 or 6, there were definitely less Ukrainians here. Like there were definitely more international students here. So I think I definitely had some friends from who are from Ukraine, and some of them I was friends with by the time, like up to the time that the war started. So like
So,
guys that are here around. But the international students here, um, a lot of them came to the school and then left after like 2 3 years because their parents either had like a mission here and they would like work here in the embassy or in a company, and then they would get transferred. So my most long lasting friends in the school were Ukrainians because they lived here and that's the school that they were going to. But I definitely made a lot of connections with like international students, and it was really fun.
do you still keep in touch with anyone who was not Ukrainian and who may have left, maybe not even before the war, but like sometime in your past?
I mean, I keep in touch with like some alumni from the school,
Yeah, yeah, fair
guys
enough.
that I knew from
hmm
like from high school. So yeah, but not people in my grade, I don't think.
So like, I guess just to kind of give like the listeners a snapshot, like, could you share? I mean, like
Um,
overall, like, would you say you had a pretty good time here in primary school?
yes, I think so. I
hmm
mean, I think from a young age, like the school was really good at um, like really giving us the chance to like explore ourselves and just be kids and like do fun stuff and communicate with our friends. Like we would go swim, I think either a couple times a week or something like that. Like we would swim very often for PE class. Like that was really fun. Like we have a full swimming pool in school. Like, but yeah, I think I really enjoyed it, and it really paved my like the way for my like whoever I was in the future and
Were,
who I am now.
were you aware of like of how nice the school was and how like and what the facilities of the school are like as compared to a Ukrainian school? like a government school. Was that, I mean, were you ever at like a Ukrainian government school, like for like a sports tournament, or like, was that something that you knew about?
Um, Probably up until the age of 7, because that's when I started playing violin. I
Mm.
started learning how to play violin, and I went to a Ukrainian school for that. And in the same Ukrainian school, there was like um, my boxing trainer rented out like a space, so I was going to my music lesson, and then I would go to my boxing classes. And at that point, I definitely saw the difference between like Ukrainian schools and KIS, and I started to really appreciate like the place that I was going to, because you would go into the bathroom and it's not like a bathroom, and it's just like a hole in the ground basically.
Yeah, I
and
mean, yeah, like I think now probably there's more private schools and there's more schools that are maybe a bit more up to date, maybe a bit more, let's say, well kept than probably the one you went to. But yeah, I think it's a reality for a lot of government schools, right? A lot of them are underfunded. The teachers are underfunded. Like it's
yeah,
just, I mean, it's not the ideal place to study.
yeah, I was just very lucky to have a teacher who was really like living and breathing like violin, so she was very passionate about what she was doing, because like the money that she earned, like it was pennies basically, and my parents would always pay her little bit extra for it, because she was a really really good teacher and I learned really quickly. But yeah, I think the Ukrainian school system really lives on teachers who are actually passionate about what they're doing, because if they didn't have them, then I think it would crumble very quickly, because people are not getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like my main experience was teaching at a private school where I think teachers were getting paid a bit more
hmm
than they were in, in a government school. So I don't actually really have much perspective on like what their motivations are, like what the deal is. But from everything I've heard, especially like after the war, right, or after the beginning of the war, and not after the
hmm
war yet, but I had some friends that work there, and they're telling me about how they'd have to go down to the Ukritia, like the bomb shelter,
Yeah,
and it was just like, I mean, it was just dank. It was like literally just like an old Soviet basement,
yeah,
and
yeah.
a lot of times they haven't even been upgraded, and like that's obviously just like a small part of the school, but that kind of, I think that gave a clue as to what the rest of the school was like in a lot of cases.
No, yeah, because like our school, we got rid of our entire library to make space for a comfortable shelter for kids
Hmm.
to go to. And honestly, sometimes when I complain that, oh my God, like we're going down to the basement, oh, it's so annoying. I think, and I remember like just the images and the videos that we get from Ukrainian schools and the shelters that they have there. And it really like snaps you back into like reality of, wow, like I'm sitting here on a couch, like with internet, with like lighting, and it's really nice. And so, yeah, definitely.
Cool. So okay, so I guess you're 17 now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so one question I did want to ask is about 2014. So you would have been a kid in 2014. You'd have been about 7, right?
Yes.
So my question is about like the Euromaidan in
hmm
2014, the Revolution of Dignity. So you were a kid at that point in time, but did you have any awareness as to what was going on? Like, did you hear about it? Was it like a thing? Like, what was your experience with that, being the age that you were?
Yeah. So, like, one of the first memories that I have is that when, like, just like the Euromaidan was just starting, when it was just a group of people, they were protesting and they got very heavily beat up by the police. And my parents were one of the first like volunteer doctors who went there to like bandage people up.
Oh, your parents are eye doctors, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they would have been helping the people that got shot in the eye by the riot police or just anyone who had
No, that
injuries.
was way before. So like,
Okay.
I mean, my parents being doctors in general just have like basic medicine. They understand like first aid, so they would go to like these places to help like the wounded people there because they were like very heavy. Like some of them had broken legs, like internal bleeding, and it was really like it was really difficult. So people needed help, and they would help. My parents were there to help, so I definitely remember that.
Like, maybe this is like way too personal a question, but
hmm
like growing up, what were your parents' thoughts? Like, were there any conversations in your household surrounding Russia and the attitude towards Russia? Because like obviously a lot of people, even prior to 2022, had this perception of Russia being like, bratski narod, like a brotherly nation, or something that's over there, maybe even like a big brother. So like if you're comfortable sharing, like was there ever any conversation surrounding Russia, or either positive or negative, during that time or even prior to that?
I don't remember any like conversations regarding specifically like Russians or Russia in general.
Mm-hmm.
I was indifferent, honestly. Like I did not care. Like I wasn't. Uh, when I saw Russians, I wouldn't like go up to one and just start talking to them because I didn't really want to. But at the same time, the conflict that was happening after the Euromaidan, so like the invasion of Crimea and the Donbas regions, like it was really far away from us. So we knew what was happening. We knew that it was a big deal, but it really did not touch our personal lives at all. So, like as someone who lives in Kiev, in the the center of the country, the capital, like it didn't really concern us. So Russia was just like an annoying little, or not little, like a big annoying deal, but it never really concerned us up until February 24th. So
Okay, I mean that's a pretty interesting perspective. It kind of makes me think of like so when I was growing up. Obviously, I'm quite a bit older than you are. Well, not
yeah,
that much, but like so the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were going on,
yes,
and those are obviously substantially further away. I mean, those weren't in the United States, but there was kind of an attitude of like, okay, that's just going on over there. It doesn't really affect our daily life,
yeah,
and probably to a lesser extent, it was with like for you that was the experience.
yeah. I definitely
Um,
agree.
yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. At least for my wife's family, it was a little bit different because her brother served in that region, and they're also, I mean, they're from Western Ukraine. There's much more, I think, of an anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian sentiment there than other parts of the country.
Yeah,
But it's just I was really curious about that because you were young, but also, I mean, you were living in Ukraine during that entire time. So I think
hmm
it's actually a good segue to kind of move up to the war itself. So I mean, you're going to school here. Everything's pretty cool. It's like a very international group of students, and as you said, the Euromaidan happened. But then after that, there's not like a huge amount of care about what's going on with Russia. So, I mean, obviously they were massing troops here well before February 24th, and so in the months prior, was there like sort of fear or understanding that something could happen?
definitely not. I remember one of my friends at the time, or I guess like more of an acquaintance, but he was organizing these like dance parties in Hrishatik. So like just on the center of like in the middle of the street, like they would like put up a speaker and they were just like people dancing there. And I remember I was there and a news reporter came up, and that was I think a week or two before the war. And the report, like just a news reporter came up to him and to ask him a question. She was like, "So, like, are you worried?" He's like, "No, we don't care." I was like, "Everything's gonna be fine." I'm like, "We're gonna be all right." And I think everybody shared that kind of like naive. I mean, now we know that it was naive, but at that point, I think people really genuinely could not fathom the fact that the Russian army is gonna invade us, because we thought that, ooh, like they just wanted to like capture those like pro-Russian regions that they
That was my
were.
perception in the beginning as well.
Yeah,
That's what I thought.
like Crimea, okay, whatever, like that's fine, whatever. But we never thought that they like that this was the segue. That was just only the beginning. That like their real plans were yet to come to fruition.
So I have a question actually. I heard from another student that there were students who left the school like a month before the war started. Is that
Yes,
true?
yes, that is like the school. I mean, keep in mind that that was like the kind of, it was like still COVID times, so people were wearing masks. Like there were vaccinations going on. People were getting sick. Like some people were getting sent home. And I think at that time, like there were actually a bunch of students who were just like sick with COVID. But also, like about a month and a half before the war started, I think the American embassy started to like kind of go off a little bit in school, and just like teachers started to talk about it more. My friends were leaving. Teachers started to leave, and at that point, like once the Americans leave, you know that
I don't
something's
know.
gonna
I mean,
happen. I mean, that's the way my parents thought about it.
yeah.
So like when they would ask me like, "Oh my God, who left today?" I was like a bunch of teachers, and they're like, "Well, it looks like something's gonna happen." So.
What was your, so this is actually a kind of a 180 from my previous questions.
hmm
What was your perception of the United States and of America up until that point? Because you were going to what was basically an American school.
Yeah.
So like what did you think about the United States up until that point?
I mean, up until 2022, I think I traveled to the US either like 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, obviously being in American school, like that culture naturally gets like
Yeah, I
transferred
mean, you even
onto
speak
you.
English with like what I would consider pretty American accent.
Yeah, yeah. So like coming to the US, it wasn't necessarily anything new or anything that I didn't understand. But from the standpoint of like a Ukrainian, the cultures and the mindset of the people are very different. So like just comparing not even to Ukrainians, but just Europeans overall, like before the war, I understood it really well that like we're very different people.
Like, what would you say are some of the differences?
Some of the differences, I think,
I mean,
I don't know.
you can be as
I'm,
insulting
I'm
or as
very, I'm
positive.
very biased right now because
Yeah.
50% of their population wants to vote for like a degenerate.
Well, to be fair, I mean, the events of 2022 happened well, after the Trump presidency.
Yeah,
And there was a lot that had already happened prior to that.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyways, like what, I mean,
Um,
without pulling any punches, like what do you think are some of the differences between Europeans or Ukrainians specifically and Americans?
I think Ukrainians are very just aware of what's going on, and Americans, as far as I've seen so far, they tend to live in kind of like a bubble where I don't think it's necessarily the problem of like Americans as individuals, but more of like America as just a country, because it seems like they are in their own minds. They're like the center of the universe. There's nothing that exists outside of America. So America is the first world, and anything that's outside of America, it's like we don't care about that. And they live in this like in their own reality. But Ukrainians, I think overall, they're just very aware in general, both of the internal problems and like geopolitics in general. And I think that sets us apart mostly because when a problem erupts in Ukraine, like people get really close, like really fast, and they start to fix it. And I don't really see that happening in the U.S. Like I think there are a lot of issues that people let slide instead of tackling and like coming together and changing.
Yeah, I mean, not to insert my own experiences in here, but so actually, when I was in Lviv last year, there was a cyber attack,
Mm-hmm.
and like mobile internet went down, like banking went down, and I remember like getting into a cab, and there was like this like 6-year-old guy, and he's like, "Yeah, it's just a cyber attack. It happens."
Yeah, yeah,
He's like, "Do you have cash?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, everything will be okay. I'll just take you wherever you want to go." And like, if that happened in the U.S., like society would have fallen apart. It would have
yeah,
been like
yeah,
the purge, like just like
yeah, yeah.
that. Actually, so that leads me to another question. Obviously now, especially, I mean, we're just a few weeks away from the American election, and there's been like a massive amount of disinformation and fake news, and I think that a lot of that's has been attributed to the Russians, but I think also there are definitely Americans that are taking advantage of the use of disinformation. Because of Ukrainians' experiences, do you think that they're more resilient to that and more? Do you think they're more critical in kind of discerning reality from what's been made up online?
Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think Ukraine is at the forefront of one of the biggest, not only conventional wars, but also informational, like cyber wars that has gone on in the last like 10, 20 years for sure. And I think we learned to double check, to not believe the first things that we see. But overall, I think this mostly concerns the younger generations because, and I think this can be said about literally any country in the world, that like the older generation, like my grandparents, or even my parents sometimes, like I would catch them like clicking on stuff and I'd be like, okay, that's not something you can click on. Like, that's not something you can do. And I think Ukrainians overall are generally more, I don't want to say educated, but more like well versed in the dangers that are presented in the internet, especially when it comes to news. But when you speak overall, like the older generations definitely struggle with it.
So this actually leads me to another question. So I lived in another, let's say, post-Soviet country, and like I traveled to like quite a few post-Soviet countries just because I was interested in that like kind of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I have noticed that a lot of people that tend to be pro-Russian have sort of have a nostalgia for Soviet times. is that something that your mom has ever talked to you about? Or actually, before we even get to that, like, what is your perception of the Soviet Union?
Well, I think I'm going to answer the question together because my perception of the Soviet Union came from my mom, my grandparents. And every single, I don't want to say like dinner, birthday, there is like a story of how crap it was, of how bad it was, of like a funny story that is actually, it is funny, but it's just super tragic overall of just life in the Soviet Union. And a lot of the things that my grandpa would say that like, you at your age are way smarter. It's not because like we're like different in terms of like mental capacity or whatever, or like intelligence, but it's just like you have this plethora of information that you have access to, and we had nothing. Like we had to, scrape from books and like try to get books somewhere, and there isn't even like an insurance that those books were good, or like, a lot of problems overall. And not to mention the Soviet propaganda at the time, where people were fed lies about what the Soviet like idea was of like unity, of everybody being together. But the reality was very different. So when one person would stay in line for simple products such as like bread or like sausage or milk, others would get like jars of caviar and like imported items that would be unavailable to anybody else. So the whole idea of the Soviet Union like falls apart just on that. Just on that statement
Sure,
alone.
it's contradictions,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, like to sum everything up, my parents and my grandparents really shaped the way I see the Soviet Union, and it's definitely very negative.
So, I mean, I've had the opposite experience where I've met people who have had nothing but okay. I think again it comes back to nostalgia, where it's like not necessarily that they've had nothing but good things to say, but perhaps they remember the most positive things. And so when they talk about the Soviet Union, it's always like, oh, we had free healthcare, and I used to take stuff and sell it in Poland and make a bunch of money, like stuff like that. Have you ever come across that mentality, or is that something that wasn't really because your family was more they had a more negative perception of Soviet times? Maybe that was something that you never really came across.
I I never came I never like encountered it with my parents or my family, but I definitely encountered it on just my daily life, just talking to people, like especially the older generation. Like a lot of them spoke with as you said, like nostalgia, that like despite those people being like Ukrainians that were very just at the very least just heavily oppressed by the Soviet Union overall, but not having the simplest means to live, but they still found reasons to want to go back there, which currently I don't know what to attribute it to, but it's probably propaganda and how good it was and how good the Soviet Union was at convincing someone that everything's going to be fine. Whatever you're experiencing is just everybody's experiencing it. We're all one big bratski narod. We're all big brother nation, and everything's going to be fine. So I definitely encountered it. But also, to add to that, like my parents, it's not that they were like, they also shared like positive things, but those weren't positive things about the Soviet Union, but just positive things about their life back then. Just like not having access to technology, they would be outside a lot, and the nature was beautiful. Like that simplicity that they were living also allowed them to really just kind of live their life to the fullest and not be, just like rotting on TikTok for hours like we are sometimes. So definitely positives, but just about life back then, not necessarily about like the Soviet Union or the
Yeah.
structure or anything else.
I mean, those types of things could be said about life in the United States or
Yeah,
a variety of other
yeah,
countries as well,
yeah,
right? Like
definitely.
that's sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? That halcyon era
Mm-hmm.
before the arrival of like digital technology on
Yes,
demand.
yes.
And I could say the same thing. Like people didn't really have iPhones till I was like in the 10th grade. So I'm not like my mind hasn't been ruined by TikTok. I mean,
Yeah,
potentially it has, but like
yeah,
not to the same extent.
yes.
Okay. So we kind of digress there, which is like totally fine. So we're talking about like some of the early weeks before the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
So what was your experience at like 5 a.m. on February 24th, or just what was your experience when the war started?
Actually, I wasn't in Kiev.
Really, where were you?
Yeah, so I was in Ivano-Frankivsk. So a week before the war started, my parents told me
Mhm.
to leave to Ivano-Frankivsk, and I did. And at that point, I thought that I was just going there because I think right, um, like that week before the war, we had ski week, so we'd have like a week off. To a lot of people went skiing, but I just stayed in Kiev. And my parents told me to go visit your grandmother. You haven't seen your grandmother in a while, so
Did you know what they were doing, or you were just
at that point, no, but I very quickly realized that, like, I think they got, like, maybe got a call or somebody told them to, get your kids away because, like, something's gonna go down very soon. And I just woke up. I think it was just like nine. Like, I don't remember, like, waking up in the middle of the night or anything, even though Ivano-Frankivsk was the target for some pretty intense airstrikes.
did it get hit by airstrikes at the beginning?
Yes, because Ivano-Frankivsk is home to an airbase where a lot of Ukrainian fighter jets are dislocated. So, um, yeah, there was definitely a target. Like the airport was hit, the airfields were hit. So, uh, but honestly, like the first 2 3 days, they were kind of right now they're kind of like a blur. So I don't really remember a lot from that time, but I remember that like me and my grandparents were glued to the TV, like watching the news, and because news would be updated like literally almost every minute, because something would happen, someone would die, like something would anyway, like something crazy would happen like every single minute. So we were like glued to the TV just watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to our question as to whether, like the pervasiveness, like that digital technology that is around us 24/7 is necessarily a good or bad thing. Like, I don't know how healthy that was in like the first weeks of the war, to be honest.
I don't think it was healthy at all.
Because like it's not like, I mean, sitting where we were sitting, there's nothing we could have done. It's not like we could
Yeah,
have like
yeah.
ordered an airstrike on Russian positions from our
Yes,
personal,
yes.
Air
No,
Force.
yeah, but as I said again, like goes to show that Ukrainians just like, we always stayed in the loop. We always know what was going on, and at the very least, it was important for my parents to understand the situation because they really wanted to get back to work. They started to get calls from their patients saying that they need help, and my parents obviously closed the clinic, let all their staff go to safe spaces where they could, be safe and not in harm's way. Um, so yeah, my parents really kept a close eye on the situation around Kiev, like where the Russian troops were, what was happening, what was
So your parents stayed in Kiev
no,
during
my
the.
parents, like February 24th. I think by February 25th they were in in Ivano-Frankivsk.
Okay, so
So
they came to join you in
yeah,
Ivano-Frankivsk. So then what happens? Are you guys like?
so we have like first of all my grandparents live in Ivano-Frankivsk, but I stayed over at our family friend's house for I think 3 weeks after the war started, and very quickly my parents realized that they needed to get back to work, and we moved back to Kiev. That drive back, that was as soon as the Russians got kicked out of the Kiev Oblast. So as soon as they left Bucha and all these towns, we moved back to Kiev instantly.
But I mean that at that point, like we didn't really know that they were gone for good. Like we still thought they could come back to Kiev.
Yes.
Was it more like, okay, well, like we need to make a living and so we're going back, or was it just like.
It's not necessarily about like making a living as much as my parents have like this very like my mom is a very good person, so she like there's people that need help.
Hmm.
She's a doctor, like my dad is a doctor, like my dad at some point went to Dnipro to the military hospital to operate on soldiers there to help out. So yeah, like my parents have this like feeling that they needed to be there, and we just decided that as soon as we get the opportunity to at least have some assurance that like nothing crazy is gonna happen in Kiev, that we were gonna move back.
Did you feel comfortable going back to Kiev, or were you a bit like.
I was definitely comfortable going back, but as soon as we got to Kiev, like I will never forget that drive through the city, because it was a ghost town. There was nothing on the streets, nobody, no cars, like it was as if like all the life got sucked out of Kiev, and like the Kiev that I loved was just gone somewhere. And I remember, I mean, me and my parents always complained that there is no, mostly my parents because they drive cars, but my parents always complained that we don't have space near our apartment to park, and that entire parking lot was empty. Like, choose any space you want. And that was,
So there was
very
an
scary.
upside. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was probably only one upside to that, yes.
Yeah. So actually, like, just in terms of like daily life, like, were there supermarkets you could go to? Like, could you get the basics at that
Yeah,
point?
yeah. Like, stuff was working. I was just,
So like, what do you say when you walk into the supermarket, right? Because like, if you're there, there's not that many people there, and there's a woman working behind the desk. You guys are basically like, at this point, like survivors. Like, was it weird interacting with people? Was everyone? Do you feel like everyone was closer? Or like, what was the vibe?
so at that point, like as soon as the Russians left, or presumably left the Kiev region, there was an influx of people. So we definitely weren't the only ones coming back. So I think in the matter of like 2-3 days, things started to kind of stabilize. So like supermarkets had some turnover, like they were selling stuff, stuff like produce wasn't going bad. There were definitely people in the stores, people to keep track of everything, and the cashiers and everything. So I I I don't recall any like crazy things or like crazy feelings coming into the store, or just getting like the basic things that we need.
And you don't live far from the school, do you? Like, you live. I mean, I think you live like a metro stop away, or.
No, I actually live really far.
Okay.
I live near the Dnipro River. Just,
Oh, okay. Okay. So, did you have any awareness of what was going on at the school? Like, was there any communication or
um,
like?
I mean, we knew that there was like the Azov regiment set up shop here.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't realize it was the Azov regiment, but I knew they were
Yes.
let the Ukrainian military had taken over the school.
Yes, and we definitely, through just some people that we know from the school, like we got word that like stuff got rummaged, stuff got stolen. At some point, they were carrying out mortar shells from the school, and
So they're firing mortars from the school.
no, but it was a storage, like our RPGs and mortars. Like they had like crazy stuff here. They took, I think, a lot of our school buses. So yeah, we definitely knew about that stuff, but we at that point definitely understood that we weren't gonna come back to school anytime soon. So we just kind of like we knew that, but we didn't really think about it that much, honestly.
So like, what were you doing for school at this point? Were you guys just like, okay,
Honestly,
like
for
a spring break forever? Like,
honestly for the like the latter part of that like year or half a year before the summer, like I was not not really doing anything. I kind of slacked. Like we had online classes, but I wouldn't really go to them. I would sometimes, but I really just didn't feel like it. And honestly, right now, I couldn't really pinpoint the exact reason why. Maybe it was just like the simple fact that like, oh my god, nobody's watching, so I'm just not gonna go to class. um, but um, but yeah, I didn't really have any motivation to study at that point. Definitely.
so when did you like come back to school? So like, okay, so you get to the end of like the 2022 academic year, which is like in
Yeah,
June,
yeah.
and then so school starts up again in 2022 in
hmm
August. Did school open again, or was it still online?
No, so it was online, and it wasn't until
It wasn't
I
until
want
the
to say
following year, right?
No, it wasn't until like February or
Okay.
March of that year that they sent out a bunch of surveys, as the school does, like asking parents if they would be willing to let their children go to school. So yeah, at that point, the school was starting to open up again, and there was like 15 kids coming to school, and we would just sit here. It was like a school co-working space. We would only the lobby was open and the gym, so we would like just sit there with our computers, like order McDonald's and just sit there and work and study, and just go play volleyball in the free time.
So were there any teachers here?
Uh, there were some teachers here, yes.
Were they teachers that are still here, or were they teachers that have since left, or?
Some teachers have since left, but I remember Miss Katya.
Mhm.
Miss Katya was definitely here.
Okay, so were there? I guess like, with all due respect to the Ukrainian teachers that were
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
were there any foreigners that stayed here, or were there any foreigners that were there in those initial days?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Because I can understand Ukrainian teachers being here, especially if they're from Kiev.
Mm-hmm.
I would be curious if there were any foreign teachers that stayed, because then I'd be interested as to like, okay, like what's the reason? Like,
No, at that point, many teachers got transferred to other schools.
yeah, okay.
And even if they were teaching KS classes, like they would be in a different country and they would have been moved and like all their stuff. So it took like the teachers that are here, it took them some time to get back. So it wasn't until the last academic year that actually, wow, a year ago. Time flies, but yeah, it was only really like a year ago that all the teachers came back.
So who were the other students that were with you? Were like,
There was, I think, a couple seniors, definitely a couple guys from my class. I think Christian was there. I don't know if you.
yeah, I mean, I met him a couple of times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Christian was there. Um, yeah, and a couple seniors, like the seniors were there. But yeah, it was like a really small group of people, really kind of chill. Everybody got to know each other really well. We kind of got to like just hang out and have fun, just kind of do something.
So like, when did so I mean, at that point, I mean, I guess it still wasn't necessarily like a real school. I mean, because I mean, you're
No,
just like kind of hanging out.
yeah, we
Just,
didn't go to class.
yeah, yeah. So like, when did that? So the following academic year, is that when?
Yeah,
So
last year.
let's say like that would be I guess August of 2023.
Yes.
So then you started coming back and you had classes.
Yeah.
So what was it like coming back to like a regular school schedule after all of that? I mean, because I guess it was COVID, then it was the war, then it was everything with the war, because COVID was a global event, but the war was just like,
There really was nothing regular about coming back here. Like, even though like we kept up to a schedule, we went to class, we did everything that we were doing before the war. But as someone, as like the rarity of someone from before like the war and COVID times, who saw the school for like what it was, it definitely was very different. And it took me a long time to really get adjusted to this being the new reality.
What were some of the biggest differences?
I mean, like the school lives and breathes community. And naturally, when you have a lot of new students, that community isn't really there. And it takes time to build it up from really from nothing. So I think if you just characterize it with one word or like a phrase, it'd be kind of like the rebirth of KIS and just like starting over from a blank page, because all of the students, all of the previous students left. And there's really nothing here that reminds me of, or some, except of some of the teachers and obviously the walls that remind me of.
I guess this recording studio, right?
Yeah, and
this
recording studio.
Podcast.
Yeah, that really remind me of what it was back in the day.
Do you think it's possible for this school to go back to what it was being, like without the war ending?
Without the war ending, yeah, the war definitely needs to end, because I think this being an international school, like we need international students to come here. And currently the way it is, it's mostly just like a Ukrainian private school more than an international school. And this is definitely not the way KIS is or should be, but the school needs to survive and we need to have students here. So I think until the war is over and we are able to get more students from overseas, it's gonna stay.
Yeah, actually, it's funny.
Foreign.
Kind of reminds me. I'm probably gonna get Leonardo on the podcast.
Oh, really?
But yeah, so for our listeners, Leonardo is our student from Mexico.
Yeah.
And I remember when he showed up the first day, I was like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
And like obviously now, I know, and he's like in my classes, so I've had a chance to like talk with him. But I do really feel like just him individually being in the class completely changes the vibe. Because also like he doesn't understand Ukrainian or Russian, so it's like everyone is forced to communicate in English, and it just like I don't know. I just think it's kind of like a more open, just more interesting environment, honestly, than a class where everyone is Ukrainian. Everyone kind of nothing against Ukrainians, but like this was an international school, and that's what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even we do have some students I know from like Latvia and I
Czech
think
Republic.
yeah, we have a student from the Czech Republic.
Yes.
But I mean, I don't know. They're kind of. I mean, there's only a few really, so it's not really enough to radically change the culture of the school.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think like the school was really about like just the opinions and the ideas, and like just the people who would come here with totally different worldviews, and they would all collide in this one space called KIS. And that was like just so special, and that's something that you don't really see much of. And like I'm so thankful that I got to be a part of it from such a young age, that I got like this understanding of what different people are like overall. Yeah.
All right, so I have a few more questions, and this is more about the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know you're not a geopolitical expert, but how would you like to see the war in Ukraine end?
Obviously, I would like it to end with everything coming back to the way it was 1991, borders, free Ukraine, um, like on the way to being a free democratic nation, part of the EU, part of NATO, rebuilding, upgrading everything. Honestly, totally changing the government because it's corrupt to like a crazy extent. And like we need some young, fresh minds to come here and start doing stuff.
I mean, that was kind of what Zelensky was supposed to be, right, at the time?
Yeah, but I guess things changed and promises are promises, but keeping up with them is another thing.
Which leads me to my next question, and I think you'll understand the connection. How has your perception of the United States changed, if it has?
So I used to look at the United States as being really like a kind of like a global power, like a superpower. There is nothing that the U.S. can't do. There's nothing that the U.S. can't influence. And at the beginning of the war, when the U.S. got to start helping Ukraine, that was definitely a very big like motivator, and it kept up the spirits, and people realized that, oh, we're gonna get like those rockets, or we're gonna get like those tanks and stuff. But currently, you see that the capacity to help and the actual help that we're getting is very far apart. So instead of getting on our knees and begging for something to come in when it's supposed to, we're supposed to be getting the newest and the best to actually help us win the war, and not just keep it just enough for us to survive. Yeah.
So this brings me to my next question, which feel free to like not answer this if you want. So we actually talked about how the IB program is still running in Russia.
Yeah.
So there's another kid in Moscow who's doing the same academic program you are, who's basically experiencing year 2 of IB, who's at international school. What would you say to that kid in Moscow?
Nothing that could be said on a on a podcast that is going to be published in school.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a perception that it's just the government, that people are not. It's just the government, not the people, and I disagree. But there is that narrative, and I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that a lot of foreigners say to me is that, oh my God, but how can you blame everyone? Like, it's Putin, it's the government, like, there are regular Russians who are also opposing the war. But I'm like, guys, like, coming outside with a piece of paper that says no war, that accomplishes nothing. If that country would actually want to change and stop the war, they would amass millions of people and start doing things like Ukrainians did. Ukrainians died in the hundreds and got injured in the hundreds to fight for what we believe in and the government that we wanted. We got oppressed, we got stopped, we got killed, but we persevered and we got what we wanted. So as a Ukrainian, there is absolutely no excuse to the Russians who say that we can't do anything about it. Because even though there's like 130 million of you guys, like if you really wanted to change something, you would, and you don't want to, and you didn't. And now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are suffering and dying because ultimately because of your inability to act and to do anything. Because you are, as we say in Russian, terpile. They just
Tolerating it.
Yeah, you just tolerate it and you don't do anything about it.
I feel like it's a very Russian thing to say, like poterpi.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that
it's very Soviet, actually. Like everything's gonna be okay. Don't worry. Like, don't worry, be happy. Everything's gonna be fine. one of the examples that I allude to a lot of the times is you can go on YouTube and search for a video from like a Russian protest and someone being carried or dragged on the ground by the police. And you can see the crowd making a circle around that person, holding a camera in their face, recording, instead of going up to the policemen and hitting them or like starting to help or do anything. Like, you would think they're part of the same movement. They're here for the same reasons, but they couldn't care less about someone being dragged by their skin and by their hair across the ground. Like, they do nothing. They stand by with a phone just recording it. And
even in Belarus, I remember seeing a video of some guy breaking out of a police van in his underwear
yeah,
and then jumping into someone else's car, and that car just like driving away.
yes, like it's a very Russian, like it's like core Russian, like
Terpi.
yeah, like people who just like they're just so separated from each other. Like they, as I said, like again, they seem to be like in the same protest in the same place at the same time, fighting for the same things, but yet they don't care. They're all, every single person is their own separate entity. They can't come together. They can't do anything together. They're just like incapable.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was a
Been
pleasure.
an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks
It's
for
actually been a
having
great
me.
way to kick off the podcast. I mean, we're gonna have some other interviews as well from some students.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was awesome, and
thank you. I
Hope-
really enjoyed it.
I hope we can have more conversations.
Oh
in the
yes,
future.
for sure.
Cool.